Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's full council meeting. Michaela, can you read out the emergency evacuation procedure, please?
If the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building and proceed to the assembly point. Follow the green running person signs to the exit using either the marble staircase or the main staircase. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point for this building is in Orange Grove on the green outside Browns. There is an evacuation chair for use by disabled people who so wish in the corridor outside the council chambers public gallery. Alternatively, the area at the top of the marble staircase has been designated as a safe refuge where persons needing assistance should assemble.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Apologies. We've had apologies from Councillor Tim Ball, Paul Crossley, Leslie Mansell, June Player, Anna Box, Dave Wood, Alison Stretford James, Deborah Collins and Sean Stevenson McGall.
Thank you. On to declarations of interest. The monitoring officer has granted a general dispensation to all councillors in respect of their payment of council tax and school governorships in regard to item 8. And specific dispensation for disciplinary pecuniary interests have been declared by councillors. Michaela, could you please read those?
The monitoring officer issued special dispensation for the following councillors: Councillor Grant Johnson and Councillor Sarah Warren, who have family member in receipt of council SEND support or social care support. Also, Councillors George Leach, Michael Orton, Dina Romero, Steve Hedges, Chris Dando, who have a family member or employer contracted to provide services or are a precepting authority or a member of a town or parish council receiving a grant from Baines Council. I also have two more other interests or non-pecuniary interests. Councillor Lucy Hodge as Chair of the Friends of Baines Society of Young Musicians and Councillor Eleanor Jackson regarding the purchase and refurbishment of Trinity Methodist Church.
Thank you. Do we have any more? Councillor Hale? Speak.
Yeah, nobody ever wants to hear what I've got to say anyway, but I have a granddaughter that currently works in Charlton House until she's made redundant at the end of March. So, just in case it's talked about.
Thank you. Councillor May?
Chair, thank you. I'm a non-executive director on the board of Serona Health and Care.
Okay, do we have any more? No? Thank you. On to item 4, the minutes from the 30th of November 2023. We have somebody to propose that they're a correct record, please. Thank you. And seconder? Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Okay. Councillor Hedges. Okay. So, on to item 5. Can I remind all councillors to please speak clearly and use the microphones and not cover them up with papers or iPads? And can I also remind councillors, if you stand to make your speeches, it's not picked up on the webcast, so it makes it harder for those that are viewing to listen to what you have to say. And following dispatch of the main agenda pack, Annex 12 of the budget report has been circulated and is available on the website. As this is a budget meeting, all votes will be a recorded named vote for item 8. And the final announcement is, unfortunately, I have to announce the recent death of former Baines councillor John Whittock. John served from 2007 to 2011, represented Midsomer Norton North, and was also clerk for Pewsdown St John Parish. I'd like to ask all members to stand for a minute's silence, please. Thank you. Item 7 on the agenda is item 6 on the agenda is any urgent business. There is none. Item 7 are speeches from members of the public. However, it doesn't appear that the 3 speakers we were expecting have actually arrived, so we'll move on to item 8, which is budget and council tax 24-25. Can I remind members that any amendments to the budget proposals will only be considered after the speeches and from Cabinet members, group leaders and PDS chairs. I'd like to invite Councillor Guy to move that in accordance with 3.1.14 Rule 3.133 be suspended to allow the length of speeches for the budget debate to be varied. Councillor Guy, you move for the suspension of the rules in relation to length of speeches, please.
Sorry, I move as noted. Sorry, I was having a debate about the previous item. Yes, I move as noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to the seconder for that item, Councillor Elliott. Thank you. Need to vote. Sorry. I'd like to invite Councillor Elliott to present the budget, please.
Thank you, Chair. In proposing this budget to members, I want to highlight the real and genuine difference a Lib Dem administration makes. Sound financial management in extremely challenging circumstances while still delivering on our promises. There have been some very difficult decisions to make over the past few months, but when making those decisions we have always prioritised the protection of our most vulnerable residents, maintenance of frontline services and delivery on the commitments we made to residents in our manifesto less than 12 months ago. Despite the Tory government's terrible mismanagement of the wider economy and the totally irresponsible head-in-the-sand approach to the local government funding crisis, through our sound financial management and carefully targeted decisions, we are able to propose a balanced budget not only for this year, but for 2025-26 as well. In stark contrast to the short-term, last-minute approach of central government, we are setting out a solid financial basis on which the Council can plan and build. Whilst we talk about the budget, Council budgets are really 2 separate budgets, one for capital and one for revenue. When you see reports in the media of councils issuing Section 114 notices, going bust in common parlance, it's the revenue budget they're talking about, the budget that covers the ongoing operational spending of the council. It's also this budget which is partly funded through council tax. I emphasise partly funded because, ignoring funds we just pass straight to and from central government, it costs about £325 million a year to run the council. Council tax next year will raise about £120 million. Not much more than a third of the total spend. The rest comes from central government funding and from the council raising money by charging for things, the Roman baths, car parking, rents, things like that. When residents see their council tax bills going up year after year, I think many must wonder why councils are saying they're struggling so badly. In order to illustrate the confidence trick that central government have been pulling over the last 10 years, I took the liberty of distributing to all members a bar chart. You know how we Lib Dems love a bar chart.
I wanted the horses.
What it shows you is that whilst our total council tax has gone up by over £50 million over the last 10 years, our unrestricted central government funding has been cut by a roughly similar amount. Our Tory central government has spent a decade transferring the tax burden from progressive central government funding paid mainly through income tax to local council tax, a regressive tax which hits the poorest the hardest. At the same time, the demand on fundamentally important services social services has become extreme. But instead of coming up with a thought-through, long-term, sustainable solution, the government does things like this last-minute, one-off, totally inadequate sticking plaster of £500 million that they seem so proud to announce. Our share of that turns out to be £1.5 million. Any extra help is welcome, sure, But it's all woefully insufficient, and it's really just a pathetic last-ditch attempt to help one or two councils in the most trouble limp through the next election when it will become the next government's problem. Speaking of which, we're obviously due a general election this year, and I think most of us would agree it can't come too soon. I've been scathing about the Tory government's complete lack of interest in actually solving the problem of social care funding. But I see no sign as yet of any ideas from the Labour Party either. I was dismayed to read in October that they decided to drop social care funding reform from their upcoming manifesto. If Labour win the general election, I honestly hope I am not going to have to be attacking this council's opposition for a similar equivocation and incompetence from their party when in government. So that's why councils are so squeezed, and that's why we've had some tough decisions to make. With reference to two of those tough decisions, during the budget consultation and scrutiny process, two areas have drawn the most comment and challenge, and I want to address those head on. Firstly, the proposed savings to social care community contracts commissioned from third sector organisations. We listened to the concerns our third sector partners raised, particularly about the risks of sudden change. We have therefore spread those changes over 2 years, giving all of us some more time. But more importantly, I've given guarantees to the third sector organisations that we want to carry out a thorough, systematic review with them. We are not seeking to impose things on them. We are also not in the business of shooting ourselves in the foot. Where services can be shown to be saving the council money by preventing people calling on council-run services, those services will obviously not be cut. If it turns out that the savings we've proposed really aren't achievable when assessed in that way, then so be it. But we spend over £9 million on over 40 contracts in this space, and they haven't been looked at for quite some time. So it seems reasonable to think that some savings can be made. I believe our third sector partners acknowledge that, and I think our estimates of potential savings are reasonable. Secondly, Midsummer Norton parking charges. Here I simply make the point that if we're having to look at raising money for really vital services like social care, prioritising the maintenance of free car parking doesn't seem like the right thing to do. We charge for car parking in the rest of the authority area, including in Keynsham. The exact form the charges will take will be subject to the consultation that will take place before any charges are introduced, but given the overall financial situation, this seems like a proportional measure. Despite all that doom and gloom, I'm really proud of what we've achieved with the revenue side of this budget. Partly owing to the fantastic performance of our heritage assets and the vibrancy of the tourist economy bringing income into the area, we're not just restricted to the bare minimum. In addition to an extra 5.8 million net into social care, helping our most vulnerable residents, we are also able to prioritise the things we promised in May last year. Maintaining our commitment to green transformation, extra resource to develop walking and cycling plans, permanent recurring funding into the Clean and Green street cleansing team, extra resource to make sure that we can dramatically scale up Baines Homes, the council's social housing programme. These things highlight our priorities and demonstrate the difference a Lib Dem council makes to the residents of Bath and North East Somerset. Turning to the capital budget, the one-off money we spend on assets and investments. When we sell an asset, that money is ring-fenced for spending on another asset. If we borrow money, it has to be for investing in assets, not to spend on day-to-day activity. Where some councils get into trouble is through borrowing heavily to invest in risky assets. I want to reassure our residents that this Lib Dem administration is not willing to take unnecessary risks with public money. All our investments, whether it's the financial investment of our cash reserves or our investments in physical council-owned assets, all our investments are carefully targeted to provide value to the residents of Bath and North East Somerset. I hear the Twitter trolls shout, "What about all that borrowing?" Well, that's another area where sound financial management comes into play. Our Treasury management staff do a fantastic job, so despite having an active capital programme over the last 5 years, when the Lib Dems took over this council in May 2019, our borrowing, rounded to the nearest million, sat at £216 million. As I sit here today, that figure, our total borrowing, rounded to the nearest million, is £216 million. It's gone up and down in between, but as a council we are no more indebted today than we were nearly 5 years ago. Because of that sound financial management, we are able to continue a really active capital programme with a range of projects throughout the authority area, from a huge increase in local highway improvements to over 3.5 million on Midsummer Norton High Street regeneration. So this is a budget that this Lib Dem administration and everyone involved in the budget setting process, councillors, officers and all members of the public who engaged with the consultation, can be proud of. Despite the unprecedented wider crisis in local government funding, it provides stability, it protects the most vulnerable, and it delivers on our promises to residents. And I move the recommendations set out in sections 2.1 to 2.4 of the budget paper.
Thank you. Councillor Guy?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by thanking Councillor Elliott, Cabinet members for resources, our Lib Dem Cabinet colleagues, and all the Council officers who have worked so tirelessly over many weeks to prepare a balanced budget, not just for this year, but for next year. I also want to commend Councillor Elliott for his clear explanation of how the Council budget works, the difference between capital and revenue, and why we're in the position we are today. At a time when so many politicians underestimate the public by deliberately reducing the complex challenges we face with empty slogans such as "Stop the Boats," it's important to acknowledge the reality of our situation with sensible, grown-up language. As we have heard, the preparation of this budget took place in extremely challenging circumstances. From the outset, we knew it would be extremely difficult and we'd have to make difficult choices. All options were thoroughly analysed and robustly debated in a respectful manner. And I'd like to thank the PDS members and all councillors who have contributed to this process. Through every step of this rigorous process, we were guided by two core Lib Dem values: our commitment to fiscal prudence and our commitment to delivering frontline services for our residents, particularly the most vulnerable in our community. This was a genuine team effort, and the result is a major achievement that we can all be very proud of. So at a time when many local authorities have had to scale back their services to bare minimum, or in the worst cases some councils face bankruptcy, I want to highlight the fact that our budget, the Lib Dems' first since last May's election, is not only balanced, it is boldly ambitious. Our aspirations are high, Madam Chair. Our aspirations are not only for the short term, they are also far-reaching. We are laying the foundation for a more inclusive, greener, healthier and more prosperous future for all of us. Last May, our residents responded to our positive vision for Bath and North East Somerset by affirming that the Lib Dems are the party they trust to run the local authority for an historic second consecutive term. So, you may ask, why do a handful of local individuals peddle their deliberate misinformation, doing their part to stoke unnecessary cultural wars? Because we are getting things done. We are taking a positive action on climate emergency, we are building the first council homes for a generation, and we are taking adult social care back in-house. So, Chair, let me reiterate some of the key figures from this budget. We are helping the most vulnerable residents by putting an additional £5.8 million into social care. We are investing £5 million into Baines Homes, which is our council house building programme. We are putting £5 million to supported housing to help reduce the provision of people in care. We are making a massive fourfold increase of £2.9 million investment in local highway improvements. We are reinvesting revenue from the Clean Air Zone revenue of £2 million in the first phase of Scholars Way in the south of Bath, which will connect educational establishments for cycling, pedestrians and other active travel. We are preserving the best of our past while creating a more sustainable future for us all. Our new economic strategy capitalises on our existing assets, and we will enable us to attract more investment, both private and public, to ensure that our area thrives. We are making the best of our unique heritage assets, like the Roman Baths, which is a world-class visitor destination. We are laying the foundation for a fashion museum, a new international flagship destination as part of the Milson Court regeneration scheme, and we are investing in our high streets and our market towns. Bath is a magnet for residents and visitors alike. It is bustling with new shops, cafes, restaurants and businesses. Tonight we need to focus on the total revenue budget of £435 million and the capital programme of £153 million, which has been worked on for months. We are delivering the best for our residents under extremely difficult circumstances. Accordingly, Madam Chair, we will not allow ourselves to get distracted by any proposals of non-material value suggested within the last 24 hours. Accordingly, Chair, I am very pleased to commend Councillor Elliott's proposed budget, and I have formally seconded it.
Thank you. I'd like to call on Councillor Moss to make a statement as Chair of the Corporate PDS panel, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Corporate PDS panel met before the Cabinet to consider the budget proposals, and I think it's fair to say that there were a couple of issues that came out at that point which have moved on since. I think every member of the PDS panel expressed concerns about the returning grants from HCRG, the 802,000 that at that point in time were looking to be cut in 24-25. So we're grateful for the fact that there seems to be that there is movement. So that goes over 2 years. Although that will be a matter for discussion later on when we come to amendments. So it's good from that point of view that there's movement on that. I think there was also concern in respect to the community resource centres. I'm trying to think of the right way of putting that. That there's proposed change of use and removal of use. And I appreciate while that isn't necessarily subject of this overall budget, I think the way we use council resources is relevant to the whole budget. But as well, I think there was recognition that these are extremely challenging financial circumstances, that the way that central government has been treating local government is a matter of some extreme concern. And I'd certainly commend Mark's presentation up until the point about he started talking about Lib Dem bar charts, and I'm afraid it lost me slightly on that one. But that's the report from the PDS panel.
Thank you. I'll sort of go back to Councillor Moss to make a statement on behalf of the Labour Group, please.
Thank you very much. And it is about context. It is moving, if you like, more into the, as chair of the PDS, that is obviously cross-party, but I think the Labour Party recognises the difficult financial circumstances that officers and the administration find themselves in. It's clearly a matter of great concern, the way that the Tory central government has been treating local government. And I think there's two examples I can bring to that. First of all, I know that 2 days before the Cabinet meeting to discuss the budget outline on the Tuesday morning, Michael Gove announced that there was an extra £1.45 million for local government, which you're never going to sniff at that kind of money, but the idea that that could be bounced in at the last minute in, let's be blunt, response to Tory councils being in deep trouble is a matter of great concern. The chart that I think has been presented to everybody looking at the amount of money coming from central government to local government over the last 14 years, I have to mention it, from the time of the Conservative Lib Dem coalition all the way through to now, is a matter of a matter of concern. And I was having a discussion 10 days ago at a Labour conference, and someone had come up with the statistic that across the country, 10 years ago there were 2.9 million people working in local government, and that is now 2 million. But funnily enough, the number of people working for central government has gone up by 900,000. It's not about savings, it's about centralisation, and it's a cynical way of central government using local government to, in a sense, process their cuts to to services and the rest. So, the budget as presented, we have a Labour amendment coming up later, and take on the expressed views about an incoming Labour government. I'm glad that you're confident about an incoming Labour government. Of course, we're taking nothing for granted on this side, but certainly, the sense that there needs to be a change of government, because at the moment, the way that central government is operating and the way that they're treating local government is, it'd be easy to say, scandalous, except that it is damaging those most vulnerable in our society in a way that is shameful.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes, please.
Thank you. Firstly, can I say, although we appreciate the huge amount of work that goes into putting a budget together, and we do thank the officers for their efforts, I must say that every year we point out the lack of supporting data and information to provide some context to some of these numbers, and yet again we seem to find ourselves in the same position. You've advised a cut of £802,000 to the third sector budget. Now, 802 is quite a precise number, so you think it'd be safe to assume that there's a calculation behind it and some details to show specifically where those cuts are going to be made and the consequences of those actions. However, this doesn't seem to have be forthcoming, despite being requested by 2 scrutiny panels. It's particularly worrying as these groups are the groups that support our most vulnerable residents, groups that stepped up during the pandemic to make sure residents weren't isolated, to provide practical help like ensuring that they had received prescriptions and food. I must also mention the proposed parking charges in Radstock and Midsomer Norton. It's purely a proposal to make a short-term financial gain without any understanding of the potential damage to our town economies. There's a figure in your budget of 195,000 as an income, but yet again there's no substance behind the figure. No talk of the installation costs or the enforcement costs, no parking surveys, no impact assessments, and also no adjustment for this newly proposed apparent 2 hours free parking, so it's clear that that's not going to last very long. There's also the ludicrous proposal to introduce emissions-based charges, which is purely an additional burden on the poorest in our society. Those that can't afford the latest EV car or the latest fuel-efficient vehicles will be the people that are penalised by this policy. And I found it particularly concerning to hear a Lib Dem councillor suggest, at a scrutiny panel recently, suggest that those costs should be much higher. We're also disappointed with your proposal to save £60,000 by the partial closure of the Welton and Bath recycle centres, which will result in the loss of more than 6,000 appointments per month. But it doesn't seem that there's been any consideration for the potential costs of the fly tipping that may happen, and they may negate any financial gain. Not to mention the unnecessary additional car journeys to use the Keynsham-Pickash lane facility. Of course, I mean, we are realistic. We understand that these are challenging financial times and there needs to be cuts. However, cutting support services, bringing in charges, while pouring huge amounts of money into a fashion museum that historically has lost £500,000 a year, does not sit well with our residents in this current financial climate. Our residents are struggling with ongoing costs. The cost of living crisis, high inflation and increased interest costs have put huge pressure on our families. So it's important to show caution before imposing any unnecessary additional financial burdens or pressures. Finally, I must just point out that we still have problems with the current process for scrutinising budgets. Expecting a robust scrutiny of your budget when all 3 panels are dominated by Lib Dem councillors is effectively you marking your own homework, and it doesn't provide the public with any confidence. So although there's much to agree with in this budget, there's also some areas that make it very difficult to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, please.
Thank you. The Green Group would like to thank the Section 151 officer and his team for the work. The Liberal Democrat Group have been making political decisions about where money should be spent or cut. Meanwhile, residents of Baines are dealing with more unemployment, more household waiting for social housing, and around 4,000 people fell into absolute poverty last year. Recent data shows a 40% rise in households in temporary accommodation. This is a budget of cuts, referred to as savings. The Tory government has let down all councils financially and created budgets slashed to the bone. Baines has had few options but to take measures that will push more individuals into dire situations, possibly causing more long-term financial problems. A fair and equitable solution for all residents through progressive taxation is not offered by the right wing, who see taxes and state involvement as interfering. I am still waiting to see fairness and opportunity created by the free market. Blaming the Tories for this Baines budget alone distracts from the choices made. The lack of collaboration by this administration has been evident in various scrutiny meetings. The third sector, which carries out many essential duties through council contracts, is facing funding cuts due to this budget. Additionally, these charities and community groups were not adequately warned by Baines about significant cuts to core services. Despite claims by Cabinet members that they discussed the cuts with the third sector, the response from the third sector was clear. This did not happen. They were given only 8 days' notice, with the consultation occurring over the Christmas period. This approach doesn't give communities a greater say, prioritise prevention, or improve people's lives. The unanimous vote by scrutiny on January the 15th to delay proposed budget cuts to not-for-profit sector services until the consequences are better understood highlights the growing concerns regarding the lack of transparency in the budget-setting process. Cuts of 102,000 are now set to take place over 2 years instead of 1. The Green Group urges better dialogue between Baines and external agency by this Lib Dem Rod Council to prevent catastrophe for many residents whose lives are already on the brink. The budget gives great emphasis to the £1.7 billion handed to WECA since 2017 and its positive impact for Baines. This is somewhat surprising given the very public spats between the Baines leadership team and the Metro Mayor. The budget overlooks the annual transport levy paid by Baines to WECA for subsidised buses, which remains unchanged at £5.195 million from last year's £5.195 million. There's a lack of awareness by the Council that inflation has increased travel and staffing expenses. In the past, the Liberal Democrats didn't accurately predict inflation. With inflation currently at 2%, shouldn't this budget plan for changes accordingly? As a result, this budget falls short of ensuring subsidised buses on crucial routes, which is essential for those with limited transport access. It's clearly another budget cut. Despite the Liberal Democrats' advocacy for buses, there are none at any NES bus stops. The Lib Dems have prioritised pursuing government funding based on the criteria outlined by the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement. While we've seen roadblocks implemented, there's still no circulation plan for Bath or North East Somerset, which could quickly transform neighbourhoods into more livable spaces for many. It's crucial to ensure that people feel safe walking, cycling or using wheeling to get to schools, shops or visit friends. These habits are essential at a time when reducing car travel is crucial for addressing the climate emergency and public health. This is about lives, not just votes. The leader is the sole shareholder at Baines for Aqueous Company, a company wholly owned by the council. Yet it is still not clear why it has cost Aqueous £3.02 million to buy 22 family homes, but will cost £3.2 million to build five two-bedroom homes and 3 one-bedroom council flats on a level site on the Lower Bristol Road. This is public money and many are unsure how it is being spent, especially when temporary housing is now costing the council over £1 million a year. This budget states that Baines will build 4,359 affordable homes, but these are not affordable to most. What is needed is a budget to deliver social housing to ensure fairness across our communities. And remember, it was under the Lib Dem Tory coalition that affordable rents became the new normal. This budget claims that Baines will construct
Can you draw
400...
comments to a close, please?
Okay. Pardon?
You've had your 5 minutes. Can you
Thank
draw
you.
close, please? Thank you. Councillor Warren?
Thank you, Chair. Anyone who think there could be a general election this year with, I think, 3 or 4 party political broadcasts. And can I just thank Councillor Moss for bringing up the coalition so I can actually share a bit of the pain with my colleagues over here, because I was getting a bit lonely at one time. I'll kind of stick to the budget a little bit more if I can. I get it's difficult to do a budget. There's limited amounts of money and a lot of things to do. So you have to make certain savings, certain cuts. I just going to go through a few things that jumped out and bit me. Earmark reserves, there's 14.3 million, which seem ready for those reserves to step into the breach if necessary. There was also an unearmarked 12.5 million, which I get you need to have that, and that's part of the policy, you need to do that. During Councillor Elliott's party political broadcast, he did mention this was a good budget for vulnerable people. The budget that I read actually wasn't, if I'm honest with you. Just a few of the headlines again. Children's Services have reduced their concessionary spending. Sometimes this concessionary spending can be a lifeline, and it can have a very difficult impact on the children and their families. Adult social care coming back in-house. There's £1 million in pressure for the first year, and this is a question, is that ongoing or will it just be a one-off? And I generally don't know, so that's not. And I wondered, again, I've been, as you've noticed, I had a sabbatical for 4 years, and just why it's come back in-house. Is it because can we run better in-house or cheaper in-house? And again, that's a genuine question again. Just another one on adults. This is our own words. Disinvest. Didn't know there was such a word as disinvest, so you learn something every day. In prevention and early intervention services. To me, that means actually not going for an intervention, which can be very costly, both in money and in people's lives. If you can get in and help people out early, it often puts a stop on what could be going down a very difficult route. The advice to ourselves, our own words, during implementation, consider any knock-on effects on vulnerable people when reducing or removing service provision. I'm just hoping it's not too late then, when will be the problem. But then sometimes you have the third sector, which will step into this. Unfortunately, cut a lot of funding to the third sector. In our own words again, prevention and early intervention offer from third sector in Baines reduced and destabilised. So we're actually saying to ourselves, we've cut the funding for the third sector and we're going to destabilise it. So we just need to be very careful about that. Just to move on from that now, Sean's actually stole a lot of thunder about this. You've got the emission-based parking again. I understand why you're looking at it. I think we all know we want to keep it clean as we can. However, sometimes you've got to sum up what good does it do against what harms it do. And I did ask this question to an officer a little while back and didn't ever get a response. It is a money-raising scheme as well, and we need money. However, at the same time, if it puts people off coming to town, it lowers the footfall. That causes harm to business, which through WECA now, we've got the business rate retention scheme, so we can keep 100% of the increase in business rates. But if you're losing businesses, you're using business rates. You're then getting less money, so you're providing less service. So just sometimes I'm a bit worried some of the money raising actually can shoot yourself in the foot. Again, I think that could happen at Radstock, Mr. Norton, with the parking charges. Parking charge, you've got a lot of emission-based in Miss Norton. Again, it's a tax on the less well-off person because they have older cars and they can't afford to upgrade to the new all-seeing or fancy cars. So, can they get into town? Are they struggling? I'll move on quickly from that. Climate emergency. We're going to shut Bath and Welsham recycling centres down every other day. What happens then? I've got a lot of rubbish I need to get rid of, so I'll have to drive to Keynsham. So I'll be using my car to get to Keynsham. So, A, it'll be costing me more money, maybe I can't afford it, and B, be more pollution. One quick plea as well, see us on Amber now. There's also mention of cuts to the parks budget. I'll put my hand up here because I'm still in conversations now. Councillor Board sadly not here tonight. to get the grass cut in Midsummer Norton because it parts and looks like a third world country. So to sum it up, I'd go back to the start. It's very easy to blame everybody and very hard to deliver a balanced budget. However, I just don't think you've got this one quite right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Warren. Okay, so we move on to the main debate. I understand we have an amendment to be tabled from the Labour Party.
Finding my button for my microphone. I've not listened to your advice about covering it with papers, but I'd like to move the amendment in the name of the Labour Group to 24-25 budget proposals, hopefully circulated, hopefully everyone's seen it, and hopefully it'll get unanimous support. This is, first of all, I'd like to thank the officers for the support and the work they've done with Labour Group in preparing this. I understand with some officers this was a little bit of a novelty. It hasn't happened for a few years, but I think they were extremely useful conversations. And as I say, I'd like to thank the work that's been done, particularly by Jill Kirk, who the Labour Group assistant, who has put a great deal of time into this. And I think the context is, of course, that this is the fourth budget from the Lib Dem fifth budget for the fifth year of Lib Dem administration. First amendment coming through from the Labour Group as the opposition. And we've kind of taken two financial principles in looking at these suggestions. First of all, don't risk income. That how can you make sure you maximise the income coming into the to the council in difficult financial times, and also anticipate potential future costs as a consequence of decisions. It's my department for unforeseen consequences that I've referred to on a number of occasions. And I think there are some elements within this budget that actually miss those points. So we're asking the administration to be bolder, to be fairer, and to be more forward-thinking and take on board these proposals. First, we're looking at generating income through a capital investment in digital advertising screens. This will produce a net revenue of £46,000 after borrowing costs, and that income should be used to offset and ameliorate proposed parking charges in Radstock and Midsummer Norton. As I say, the proposal, and it was agreed by the 151 officer, personally, I'd have used the money from the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone as capital to actually have the novel idea of taking money from something that local people didn't want in the Somer Valley and putting it into something that people did want. I'd also like to spend a minute talking about reprofiling the HCRG returning contracts to the voluntary sector. It's good to see this is over 2 years. We want to see that over 4 years because we don't want to see an increase. We don't want to see a loss of services. We need to take account of the leverage that the voluntary sector brings in and the value of those services. Also, the investment in foster carers is for 56,000 is something we need to do, and I'm sure that one thing that the whole council will agree is that an extra £244,000 to assist the rural part of the Baines economy with supporting bus services to counteract the amount of money that was just shoved into Bath before the last election. We need to see a counter to that for a year to prove demand and for buses in the rural areas. A full review of the Baines commercial estate, peer assessing against other similar organisations and authorities, and how we can use properties to provide services for Baines residents. Charlton House is a good example of how you can provide a service for vulnerable younger people, but I'm not totally sure that taking it away from vulnerable older people was the way to do that. I'm looking at the orange light and aware that time runs out and runs short, but fortunately I have Liz Hardman to follow, so I'm just the warm-up act to to moving this budget. So I'd say to the administration, please be bold. Take on these proposals from, I hope, what is a supportive opposition, and I know that one of our jobs in the next year as opposition is that while there's much in the Lib Dem budgets that is there to support, we also know as the year passes by and budgets overrun and maybe things don't happen, it's to make sure that that what is said in principle actually comes into practice, and so is not necessarily, shouldn't be judged as simply a Lib Dem bar chart in future reference.
Thank you.
I'd like to move the amendment on behalf of the Labour Group.
Thank you. Can I just check with Will, is this classed a substantive amendment, please?
Chair, so having consulted with other statutory officers, my judgment is that this is not a significant change to the budget proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Hardman, I believe you want to second this proposed amendment.
Thank you. I am pleased to second this amendment. These proposals, as outlined by Councillor Moss, show what additional plans we, as the Labour opposition group, have for a fair and a just budget. It is costed. It aims at improving services, especially for the most vulnerable, as you would expect from a Labour group. But you might be surprised when I add that these proposals include a prudent use of finance, even value for money. You might even think this is unachievable, that we might be borrowing more to pay for more. Not true. Our proposals include imaginative and creative ideas. To generate income, for example, through digital advertising, to raise money through a tourist tax, to invest to expand, as in our fostering proposals, and to help levelling up by scrapping car parking charges in Midsummer Norton to be paid for from our ideas to generate income. Now, I might have missed something, but Councillor Elliott and Councillor Warren didn't actually mention Radstock. So I assume that Radstock may not be expecting car parking changes, but I might be advised to the rejection of this. So I look forward to hearing from this. But I know the residents in Radstock would be very pleased to hear this. We welcome the proposal to change the proposed one-off cut of $802,000 this year to the voluntary sector and to spread it over 2 years. However, as a Labour opposition, we would go further and spread the cuts over 4 years and enter into immediate discussions with the voluntary groups. I'm glad to hear, Councillor Elliott, that a review is planned, but this should have happened some time ago. You all know, I'm sure, but just to remind you, many of these voluntary groups, such as Julian House and Developing Health Independence, not only provide services for many needy and vulnerable people, but they also help us to fulfil some of our statutory duties. To conclude, I urge you to support this amendment, which brings fresh and innovative ideas to generate income, to raise money, to invest, to improve services, and much more. Many of the proposals are not just for 1 year, but spread over a number of years, showing considerable thought into providing services, yet balancing the budget. These have been discussed and thought out with Baines officers. We thank them for their help and time in helping us to prepare our proposals. This is a little taste of what a Labour-led administration could do. We will, as a Labour group, be supporting the Lib Dem budget, but we do think it would be much further enhanced by our Labour amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Guy, do you accept the amendment?
I'm afraid not, no.
Councillor Guy? No. Okay, we'll open up debate on the amendment. Does anybody want to speak on the Labour amendment? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Yes, I mean there's some ideas here that I certainly would support, but I would be concerned. I mean, first of all, the revenue generated from the income of £46,000 to offset parking charges. The budget is trying to raise £195,000 in parking charges. So it's still going to be a charge on our residents, and that's not acceptable. I would agree that spreading the cuts of 802,000 to our third sector over 4 years rather than 2 is a benefit. But before we even get that far, we need a full review and an impact assessment to understand exactly where this council intended to make those cuts in the first place, because that information has not been forthcoming to date. And thirdly, the scope for potential for an introduction of a tourist tax, I would suggest that there are already enough barriers in the way of people visiting our city at the moment without adding any additional ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other members wishing to speak on the amendment? No. Councillor Elliott, can I ask you to reply on the amendment?
Certainly, thank you, Chair. I'll start by pointing out that I spent some of my budget speech railing against the last-minute nature of central government and the desire to plan properly. So I have to say that receiving a proposal on the day the budget's being presented, which is what's happened here, doesn't really seem like it's a serious proposal. It's just an attempt to gain a headline. This is a hodgepodge of various suggestions which we have to vote on as a block. Some of them may have some merit, but I suggest that if you believe they do, you take them through the PDS process for consideration in future years. For example, the proposal to raise money on digital advertising boards. If it's a serious one, then let us have the details and we can take it through a proper process. But even if we were to raise the amount suggested, I'm not convinced that maintaining free car parking in one part of the authority area is the right priority use of that income. I addressed the community contracts in my speech. I stand by my comments then. You missed the second part of what I said, which is we won't cut services that save the council money. We couldn't start the review any earlier because the contracts were being managed through HCRG, and we will not cut services until the review has taken place. I cannot be clearer about that. As I say, with regard to the suggestion on buses, I strongly advise you to talk to your Labour WECA mayor and to take seriously his responsibility for buses. We already give a significant amount of money to WECA for buses. That budget is underspent. He is not spending all of that money. I would love to see more buses in North East Somerset, and he ought to be providing them. Please put pressure on him to do so. As I say, we have to vote on this as a block. We can't support a hodgepodge of amendments, so I suggest we move to the vote.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the vote on the amendment. Vote. No. No. It's in the process. He's... Your amendment. He's got final word. Okay, so we're going to move on to a vote on the amendment, which is a named vote. So I'll pass over to Michaela to do the vote. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to read out each of your names in alphabetical order. If you could just let me know if you are for, against or abstaining. Michael Orton.
Against the amendment.
Alex Beaumont.
Against.
David Biddleston.
For.
Colin Blackburn.
Against.
Alison Bourne.
Against.
Sorry. Chris Dando.
For.
Jess David.
Against.
Mark Elliott.
Against.
Sarah Evans.
Against.
Fiona Gawley.
Against.
Kevin Guy.
Against.
Alan Hale. Ian Halsall.
Against.
Dave Harding.
Against.
Liz Hardman.
For.
Gavin Heathcote.
I'm against.
Steve Hedges.
Against.
Saskia Hajidas.
Abstain.
Ollie Henman.
Against.
Joel Hurst.
Against.
Lucy Hodge.
Against.
Duncan Hounsell.
Against.
Sean Hughes.
Against.
Dr. Eleanor Jackson. Grant Johnson.
For.
Samantha Kelly.
Against.
George Leach.
Against.
John Leach.
Against.
Hal McPhee.
Against.
Ruth Malloy. Paul May.
Against.
Matt McCabe.
Against.
Sarah Moore.
Against.
Anne Morgan.
Against.
Robin Moss.
For.
Michelle Doherty.
Against.
Bharat Pankania.
Against.
Dina Ramiro.
Against.
Amanda Rigby.
Against.
Paul Roper.
Against.
Sam Ross.
Abstain.
Omkar Sani.
Against.
Toby Simon.
Against.
George Tomlin.
Against.
Malcolm Treby.
Against.
Andy Waite.
Against.
Karen Walker. Against. Sarah Warren.
Against.
Tim Warren.
Against.
Joanna Wright.
Abstain.
Point of order, Chair. Just to say that I know there's quite a lot of H's on this council, but I've been missed out. Could I record my vote as against, please?
Sorry. Ian Halsall. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I have got. You are on there. Right, okay. So 6 for, 41 against.
3 abstentions.
3 abstentions. 3 abstain. Yeah. So that's carried. Do you want to read that?
6 for, 41 against, and 3 abstentions. So that amendment falls. Okay, move on to the Green Group's amendment, please.
Thank you. Last year, in the 23-24 council budget meeting, 32 Lib Dems voted against the Green Party amendment for a school street in Baines, promising that school streets were going to be delivered in some form in the next budget. To date, we have seen no delivery of a school street in Baines, and only suggestion of a soft school street options and a 40,000 for a school improvements to the smallest school in Baines, which does not suffer from through traffic. For the last 30 years, children have increasingly been taken off the roads and have been replaced with cars instead. This creates a vicious cycle whereby the volume of traffic makes the roads unsafe, so parents will drive their children everywhere. Parents driving children to school is a massive problem in Bath and North East Somerset, and in Bath, it's 51% of trips between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. are related to education. 60% of parents are worried about traffic speeds at schools when their children walk to schools. School streets are restrictions on traffic at schools' opening and closing times to improve road safety and air quality and increase the number of children travelling actively to school. Traffic restrictions are enforced using access signs, temporary bollards, and in some cases automated number plate recognition cameras. Since July 2021, Baines became one of 12 local authorities in England outside of London to be given new civil enforcement powers to use automated number plate recognition. These new powers could be used to implement school streets. Revenue from enforcement could contribute to the cost of future school streets. So why are there no plans for school streets in Bath? Baines also states that it is committed to reduce vehicle mileage by 25% per person by 2030. It is implementing roadblocks through the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement. It is implementing resident parking zones and increasing the cost of parking. Yet the very people making these decisions have the ability in some cases through the paper parking permit system given to councillors to park anywhere at any time. Our amendment to the budget calls for a school street in Baines. It also importantly demonstrates to all residents that councillors should be no more privileged than any other group when moving around the district, and the Green Party is urging an immediate end to paper parking permits for all councillors. Also, to cease providing free parking in Bath via My Permit for councillors representing wards within the City of Bath while performing council duties. Therefore, I propose the amendment as set out for a school street and changes to councillor parking permits. Thank you.
Thank you. Will, that has a significant change in your opinion, please?
So, Chair, as with the previous amendment, I've consulted with statutory officers, and my judgment is the same, that this is not a significant amendment to the budget.
Councillor Helgers will be seconding.
Point of order. Sorry, I've got point of order.
Yeah, thank you very much. One for the monitoring office, actually. I was a bit slow picking this up, but a few years ago, I was contracted to work on a self-employed basis for My Permit. We never actually did because of COVID and the lockdown. So I wonder if I should declare an interest in just this little bit or not. Yeah, potentially. I'm just asking the question now. I didn't actually have a start for them because of COVID, but we were contracted to work on a self-employed basis. So whether I should declare interest in this bit, yeah. So would you like me to leave the room while this is on? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott and Councillor Guide, you accept?
Councillor Helgers to second the motion, the amendments?
Yeah, it needs to be seconded.
Sorry.
And then we ask whether it's accepted or not.
Councillor Seaman, move on.
Slightly different one today.
Right. Sorry. Who's seconding? Sorry.
Councillor Helgers.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to second the Green Group amendments for a school street to be delivered in Baines in 24-25 and for changes to councillor parking permits. This council is repeatedly asking residents to re-evaluate how they move around, and we have signed up to the climate emergency, to the West of England's joint local transport plan, the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans, and created the Journey to Net Zero Transport Forum. These documents and groups are committed to changing how we travel around. Yet the very people who voted in this chamber for these changes are still given the ability to park anywhere for free in Baines. This is not setting an example. It is clearly showing that we think ourselves privileged and exceptional. I have no doubt that many councillors have many other commitments and need to be able to move around a district in the most efficient way possible. But we do need to remind ourselves that as decision makers, then we need to be showing that we too can change in part our transport behaviour. For Bath councillors, we do have buses, the option to use e-scooters or e-bikes, and these alternatives offer a way to reduce car miles. Should a Bath councillor with a disability need support for access, then we appreciate that this should be given. According to ROSPA, every month 1,200 children are injured in traffic-related collisions within 500 metres of their school. We know anecdotally many parents are too anxious to allow their children to walk or cycle independently because they are so concerned about dangerous driving. In 2022, 40% of children aged between 5 and 10 years old were driven to school. In the context of 1/4 of primary school children becoming obese by the end of year 6 and the resulting lifelong health implications, we believe it is vital to enhance opportunities for children and young people to walk and cycle safely. Some of the 15 livable neighbourhoods areas are near school, but this is not good enough. A livable neighbourhood near a school doesn't offer the same experience as a school street and therefore doesn't achieve the goal necessarily to reduce parents driving their children to school. We know that many councils are delivering school streets at speed. Islington has 34 and Bristol has 11 school streets. A year has passed and still children in Baines have not had one school street. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Guy, do you accept the amendment?
No, I'm afraid not.
No. Okay, do we have anybody wishing to speak? Councillor Jackson?
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if there could be a ruling on whether it's appropriate to offer an amendment which appears to only apply to Bath and Bath councillors. I have a paper permit which actually I've never used, and yet I still managed to get issued with a parking ticket last week, although I have no car registration that could possibly have been picked up by my permit, and it's still a mystery to me how the system could do that. So I don't know if it's connected to the issue of paper permits or what or not, but I do feel that it's not legitimate to have an amendment which could only apply to a very few councillors. And secondly, you really don't want me on a scooter. You have to think about the practicality for disabled people, and of course Tier E scooters are not available on Midsummer Norton High Street. Perhaps they will be in future when people are having to pay for their parking charges. But again, I'm saying, can you have an amendment which is limited to a very few wards and does not apply in North East Somerset?
So the amendment, Councillor Jackson, is a valid amendment. So the geographical is not an issue in terms of the validity of the amendment.
I think we might ask whether it's appropriate for North East Somerset to be treated differently from Bath, although of course many of our residents are convinced that Bath is always being subsidised by North East Somerset, and perhaps this is an opportunity to redress the balance. But I really don't think you can park free anywhere, anyhow, anyway with a permit.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to speak on the amendment? Councillor Elliott, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair. As with the previous amendment, I should point out that an amendment received on the afternoon of the Budget Council meeting is evidently not a serious attempt to change the budget. It's a stunt. The first part of the amendment wants 200,000 put into school streets. I agree completely on the importance of school streets, and I'm happy to say that I sat in a Transport Members Board meeting 2 weeks ago and agreed to spend £250,000 on school streets, on a school street trial, using money from the Clean Air Zone Reserve. So we're already doing this, it's already going to happen, it's signed off, it's happening this year. So the first part of this amendment is asking us to do something we're already doing. The second part, which references the means by which councillors are refunded for parking charges whilst on council business, and I have to say, hearing the Green Party refer to modal filters as roadblocks is quite startling. That's the kind of populist culture war language I expect from the Tories, not from and Save Our Streets, not Greens. But we're dealing with a 435 million revenue budget here, and this is estimated to save 1,100 quid. It's not a serious budget amendment. Whatever the merits of the proposal, it's not a serious budget amendment. I'd also like to say that I think that the implication that councillors are abusing permits by going shopping or attending sporting events is pretty offensive. If you've got any evidence of that happening, I suggest you report it. I think that I would be appalled if any of my colleagues were doing that. I'm sure you would too. As a Bath councillor who usually travels to the Guildhall by e-bike or e-scooter, I think it's right that councillors should seek alternative uses to the car for council business, but there's no equalities impact assessment here. As Councillor Jackson has pointed out, there's no nuance around less able people, there's no nuance around what less well-off councillors should do. We don't want to be socially excluding people from being councillors either. Again, if the Green Group want this proposal worked up seriously and properly, I suggest they bring it through PDS, where they may find it gets some serious cross-party support, but it can be worked up properly and put forward as a proper proposal, as opposed to a budget-based stunt. So I can't support the amendment, and I suggest we move to the vote.
Thank you. Can we move to the main vote, please?
Michael Orton.
Against the amendment.
Alex Beaumont.
Against.
David Biddleston.
Abstain.
Colin Blackburn.
Against.
Alison Bourne. Against. Chris Dando. Jess David.
Against.
Mark Elliott.
Against.
Sarah Evans.
Against.
Fiona Gawley.
Against.
Kevin Guy.
Against.
Alan Hale.
Abstain.
Ian Halsall.
Against.
Dave Harding.
Against.
Liz Hardman. Gavin Heathcote.
Against.
Steve Hedges.
Against.
Saskia Hedges.
For.
Ollie Henman.
Against.
Joel Hurst.
Against.
Lucy Hodge.
Against.
Duncan Hansel.
Against.
Sean Hughes.
Against.
Dr. Eleanor Jackson. Grant Johnson. Samantha Kelly.
Against.
George Leach.
Against.
John Leach.
Against.
Hal McPhee.
Against.
Ruth Malloy. Paul May.
Against.
Matt McCabe.
Against.
Sarah Moore.
Against.
Anne Morgan.
Against.
Robin Moss. Michelle O'Doherty.
Against.
Bharat Pankania. Manda Rigby.
Against.
Dina Romero.
Against.
Paul Roper.
Against.
Sam Ross.
For.
Onkar Sani.
Against.
Toby Simon.
Against.
George Tomlin.
Against.
Malcolm Treby. Andy Waite.
Against.
Karen Walker.
Against.
Sarah Warren.
Against.
Tim Warren.
Against.
Joanna Wright.
For.
So that's 3 for, 40 against, with 7 abstentions.
Thank you. That amendment then falls. We now move on to debating the substantive budget item. First speaker I have is Paul May.
Thank you, Chair. As the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, I wish to thank the officers and Councillor Elliott for the way they've responded to the demand and complexity pressures in children's services. This demand-led service has seen so many pressures since COVID-19, resulting in a budget overspend this year. An example of the additional pressure on the children's services budget is the government requirement that councils across the country share the costs of caring for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. These children rightly have to be treated properly, but the costs exceed the funding allocated by the government. All top-tier local authorities have this responsibility, so if their case is not decided by the Home Office by the time the child reaches 18, we then have the statutory duty to care for them up to the age of 25 without any additional funding. No Cabinet member expects or likes to be responsible for overspending, but after detailed scrutiny by the officers, the Cabinet member and the Cabinet, there has been a momentous and courageous decision to recommend £5.2 million growth in our base budget for 24-25. We're looking to see if we can reshape the service by greater early intervention schemes such as family group conferencing, supporting families, greater use of supported lodgings to allow young people to develop their life skills. We are currently proud to be rated as good in all categories by Ofsted because we have dedicated staff who care for the most vulnerable children in our community. But I've seen the stress this commitment is causing, so the rebasing of the service to cope with these pressures is an enormous plus moving forward for the staff and, more importantly, for the children and families that we protect. In addition, the Council is investing in a new data and financial systems from April for the service to better control its management and finances. The Lib Dem Council has responsibly managed its income, which has allowed this new commitment to vulnerable children to be achieved, where other local authorities facing similar pressures have cut frontline services to the general public. I will be fully supportive of the Lib Dem Council budget proposed this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Karen Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The reduction of opening times and days at Bath and Miss Norton Recycling Centre will make savings of £60,000, while residents are being asked to use Keynsham, which will save them full time. What about air pollution? What about the cost of energy and fuel to those people from the other parts of the authority, and especially those on low income? Reducing the opening hours at Bath and Miss Norton will have an impact on fly tipping, cost the authority more money. I haven't seen a sum of money to cover the additional fly tipping on our roads and bridges in the budget papers before us. Local authorities in England dealt with 1.9 million fly tipping incidents in 22-23, costing over £1 million per year, not to mention the cost to landlords to remove fly tipping. Landowners nor taxpayers should not have to pay for the removal of fly tipping. Reducing the opening times of Bath and Miss Norton recycling centres to save money on staff and agency costs is not saving money. Baines will be spending more in the long term. Dumping waste on public and private land will have a huge impact on wildlife and farming business. I will be voting against this budget, but I would like to thank this administration for the sum of £35,000 for resurfacing in Peasdown St John.
Thank you. Councillor Sarah Warren.
Thank you. Last month was the 8th consecutive month in which global temperatures hit a record high, as the warmest January in the 175-year global climate record. It was also the world's second wettest January on record, and we saw a record high monthly global ocean surface temperature for the 10th consecutive month. In a further horrifying development this week, it was reported that the ecosystem of Loch Ness in Northern Ireland, the largest freshwater lake in the British Isles, is likely experiencing a cascading ecosystem collapse. This is an irreversible change from a thriving, diverse ecosystem supporting over 100,000 migrating birds and enormous insect populations to a soupy scum supporting next to nothing. In this dire context, I can't emphasise enough the importance of our work on the climate and ecological emergencies. And I am really proud that despite savage Conservative cuts, we in Baines have managed to preserve funding for our vital manifesto priority of tackling the climate and ecological emergency. The scale of the challenge is huge, and we are prioritising wherever we can in our incredibly stretched budget. This is in contrast, however, to the Labour Party nationally, who last week abandoned their pledge to invest £28 million in green growth. This was on the same day that it was announced that global average temperatures for 2023 broke 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, a temperature highlighted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as the safe limit for life on Earth. This U-turn therefore demonstrates a truly disappointing failure from those who may form our next government to understand the gravity of our situation. It represents an appalling lack of vision and nothing less than the wholesale abandonment of our younger generation. So to return to this budget and highlight just a few of our most important proposals on transport, we've allocated £250,000 from Clean Air Zone revenue for school streets, £2 million also from CAS money to commence the build-out of Scholars Way, a cycle route connecting communities and schools across the south of the city, as well as additional resource to support the preparation of bids for future active travel routes, as well as the production of a circulation plan for the city. I'm also thrilled that this budget incorporates support for nature in communities all over the district through our Riverline, Waterspace, Bathscape and Summer Valley Rediscovered green infrastructure projects, along with funding for additional woodland cover and an ambition to deliver greater biodiversity through the planning process being consulted at present as part of our local plan consultation.
I think, in contrast to the National Labour Party, that this budget demonstrates that we in Bath and North East Somerset are now truly embedding our focus on climate and nature through every area of our work. I commend the budget to you.
Thank you. Councillor Heathcote.
I'll try and keep this short and sweet. Thank you, Chair. Each year we see pressures from central government on local councils to cut their spending, an approach that will ultimately lead to the closure of more services that our residents need and rely on. Baines Council, though, should always do all it can to protect spending on frontline services, such as our libraries and the community support contracts. The administration proposed cuts of almost £1 million to local charities, and the voluntary sector would be catastrophic. The work that organisations like DHI do to support our most vulnerable is essential to ensuring those with drug and alcohol addictions get the invaluable support they need. The Council's cuts to charities and their refusal to invest more funding in community libraries like ours in Peasdown St John comes at the same time that they continue to invest millions in their own pet projects. On multiple occasions over the last 6 months, Councillor Walker and I have raised our concerns about the future of Baines Council's community libraries. The local authority is providing less staff support for these 11 libraries, yet expects volunteers to do twice as much work with no funding support. This budget does very little to show how the administration values and appreciates some of our most valuable and marginalised communities. I urge the Council to look again and rethink its drastic cuts to frontline services. Our residents deserve better than this. I will be voting against this budget, but I reiterate what Councillor Walker said, and I do thank the administration for the £35,000 that it's allocated to Peasdown. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hale.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the administration for the fact that they're building council houses. Probably not enough, but keep going, and hopefully it will work. But it does annoy me when you talk about affordable houses. We don't want affordable houses. We want houses where you can actually pay rent and have somewhere to live. If you can't afford it, then it has to be rent and not purchase. Excuse me. I find it a little bit ironic looking at the council response on page 196 of the package, and the talk about the constraints of the budget. If we have those constraints, and I appreciate the fact that we are dealing with a climate emergency, but we are a very small part of this much bigger world, and we are working hard at achieving it here, but we're not going to achieve a change in the world. So for the time being, whilst funds are restricted, call it what you like, we haven't got enough money, should we be continuing to provide cycle lanes? I wouldn't have a problem with it if every time I went past a cycle lane, I saw lots of cyclists using them. Similarly, the Ring of Steel. I think the last figure I heard was 10 million that's costing us. Now, I know that the story is that it's to prevent terrorists who have a daytime contract, and out of hours people who come into the town to enjoy themselves, well, they're taking a risk, it would seem. The cynical amongst us, and I'm probably one of them, I suppose, would believe that it's just another way of getting in the way of cars. Low traffic neighbourhoods, I think the one at Queen Charlton is absolutely outstanding and working extremely well, and obviously to the benefit of the local community. But the others that are now being put in around the authority would, from the evidence we see through the various emails, they aren't something that people necessarily want. And if people don't necessarily want them, why are we putting them in? I know you consult, but I'm not quite sure how effective the sort of workings of that consultation is. Councillor Guy talked about investing in high streets going forward. Well, in me finishing what I've got to say, can I just say Keynsham High Street? That's the place where we've injured over 100 people over 2 years, and where we've done absolutely nothing. And the simple sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. At least I mentioned the street. Not that it make a lot of difference, but there we are.
Thank you. I've got 10 more members wishing to speak, so I'm going to draw a line under it there. The next speaker is Councillor McCabe, please.
Thank you, Chair. So what happens when a bunch of hedge fund managers try and run a country? Of course, what happens is they go in and they strip out all the unnecessary expenditure, which is essentially public services through local authorities. They maximise the income, so we're under the greatest tax burden we've ever had, and then they borrow against that and return the funds to their supporters and their investors. So we've got very high tax burden on us. We have 2 trillion national debt. And what we discovered that they might have gotten away with it were not for the fact that Putin invaded Ukraine and gas went up and inflation went up everywhere. So what the government did was they created a boom in luxury goods. That led to inflation, doubled down with Putin's inflation, and we've got a cost of living crisis, far in excess of what our European brothers and sisters have. But there are consequences to what's been going on in this country over recent years. And here in Baines, we have, obviously, there's the environmental cost of sewage in the rivers, but there's the human cost, as has been mentioned. People are plunged into poverty, and even the middle classes are worried about turning their heating on. The home search list that the council runs has nearly 5,000 people on its waiting list, but only 500 homes come forward every year. And last year we estimated that there were about 982 who could be classed as in urgent need of a home. The number of households presenting as homeless has trebled. In 2019 there were 31. By the end of last year there were 84. And that's in, as was referenced, temporary accommodation, overnight accommodation, where the government refunds us £100 a week, but it costs us £100 a night, roughly. Baines's house prices are 13 times the national average, 18 times the national average in Bath. Private rents are high, with a median of £1,347 a month to rent. And social rental accommodation amounts to just 14% of our market, and the net average is 17%. Affordable was raised. The definition was created under the last Labour Party when I was a civil servant under the last Labour government. The affordable definition was created then. So social rental is the answer, and it's vital that we rapidly expand our social housing building programme under the Baines Homes banner, and I am very glad that money has been set aside to do this. Not just continuing as we're doing, but ramping up to start delivering the hundreds a year that we will need. Therefore, I support this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Henman.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, it's clearly a very tough budget. We've heard from Mark Elliott that, like all councils, we are facing a triple challenge due to long-term cuts due to local government budgets imposed by central government since 2015, increasing demand for social care and children's services, and the fact that costs have been spiralling due to inflation. So this does mean a huge squeeze in real terms budgets. And I agree with what's been said, that it is shocking that the Conservatives seem to think that a last-minute sticking plaster would be enough to keep local government afloat. We know that many other authorities, including in our region, face even tougher circumstances than we do. We need real long-term investment in social care services, as well as education, health, and a just transition. As Lib Dems, we value partnerships with the voluntary sector, nor do we want to reduce support to parks and green spaces. We want to be able to ensure that everyone is able to fulfil their potential, and we want to ensure that biodiversity is enhanced. That's why I'm proud that in spite of the Conservative cuts, we are looking to the future and backing a green transition. I recently visited Cleve Court Residential Care Home in Twerton, where I saw the retrofit programme to move the entire building to renewables with a solar array powering an air source heat pump. And I'm really glad that there are additional measures coming forward in the budget, such as investing in additional renewable energy and heating infrastructure around the council estate, further air source heat pumps planned for Carswood and Connections daycare centres, working with partners to develop new renewables projects contributing to our district level targets of 300 megawatt generating capacity by 2030, working with WECA, with the West of England Combined Authority and local partners to scale up retrofit support across the district, helping to make homes more energy efficient and relieve the cost of living pressures for residents. We're also working in partnership with Barsham West Community Energy and other partners to promote homeowner action on retrofits and green open homes, as well as a project on heritage retrofit. Finally, just to conclude, it's clear to me that as a council, we should be outward-looking and working in partnership with local communities and energy partners to generate additional investment and provide opportunities to help to bring down local residents' energy bills. This budget begins to take us down the right path to deliver a fairer and greener future.
Thank you. Councillor Jess David.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Elliott and officers for all the work they've done to produce the balanced budget. Unfortunately, the level of savings required means that once again we are committing to finding efficiencies across council services, and I want to speak about one service area in particular, which is important to all the communities we serve and relevant to my interest area as Member Advocate for Green Infrastructure and Nature Recovery. Our Parks team, which covers all the work that we do to maintain and improve green and open spaces, including parks and play areas, allotments, roadside verges and woodland. This is a non-statutory service, which means that as resources for maintenance and improvement are under threat as council budgets get tighter. If you look at the Park Managers Association website, you will see this is a trend across the country that's been going on for some time. Park services have been severely hit by budget cuts, with parks and green space management professionals becoming marginalised and significant numbers of posts lost. So for that reason, throughout the budget process, I've taken a particular interest in how the scale and scope of savings necessary here would impact our parks team. In my view, our parks team is already lean, and yet despite this, it plays a vital role working directly with communities on initiatives to improve local parks and green spaces for people and for nature, and these are incredibly important as part of our work on the ecological emergency. This includes significant capital schemes, but also the ongoing daily work to plant trees, repair broken fences and footpaths, replace broken play equipment, and work with local people on initiatives to improve biodiversity. I am moderately reassured that work to review delivery models in neighbourhood services is at an early stage and no decisions have been made, and I'm grateful to Cabinet members and to officers that have agreed to share further details as this work continues. But I'd like to express my view to Cabinet members and the whole Council here that we need more and not less resource for our parks team, and we must maintain the people, morale and resource to improve as well as maintain our parks and green spaces. I know that many other councillors will share my concern and would also welcome reassurances, and I would like to see further exploration to our Climate and Environment Scrutiny Panel about how this vital service can be safeguarded in future years.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. I'm making this statement as the lead member for Adult Social Care. Over the past 14 years, successive Conservative governments have failed to fund social care properly and have systematically cut funding to local authorities. Boris Johnson's rather belated social care reforms did not survive the changes in leadership of the Conservative Party and have been quietly shelved. As a consequence, we are now at the point where councils across the country are declaring themselves insolvent because they do not have the resources needed to deliver the services they are legally required to provide. This includes the adult social care services that support some of our most vulnerable residents. As central government funding has been cut, councils have been required to raise more funds locally through council tax increases, and in recent years through a social care levy. This method of taxation is regressive because it affects poorer households disproportionately. It is not what we would choose, but it is necessary to raise the income we need to maintain essential services. Within social care, demand is increasing, reflecting our ageing population, as is the cost of providing care. Locally, our adult social care budget has been increased to reflect these pressures, but we must also find in-year savings. The draft budget proposed that we made savings on some preventative services provided by local third sector providers, which caused significant concern. I'm delighted that provision has now been made to enable us to delay any decisions on these services until we have a full understanding of the implications of such savings. That work will be done jointly with our third sector providers. The budget also includes capital investment that will enable us to develop more services that accommodate people with complex needs within Bath and North East Somerset. This is better for our residents and will also help to contain costs, which will make the funding we have go further. We recently took the difficult decision to close Charlton House Nursing Home with a view to repurposing the building as a residential special school that will enable more young people to receive their education locally. As funding is so tight and the pressures are so great, we will need to look at all of our social care services to ensure that they are delivering best value and quality for our residents. We trust that colleagues across all parties will recognise the necessity of this work and will support us. We also hope they will recognise that other income-generating measures are essential if we are to maintain services for our vulnerable residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gawley.
Thank you. As we head towards spring, there are some green shoots even in the field of buses. I am delighted that after a lot of campaigning and despite opposition from WECA, Baines has finally secured funding for the 94 bus. This will match the funds from Wiltshire County Council so that this bus from Bath to Trowbridge can continue to serve our rural villages, several schools, Bath University and a large care home. Thank you all for all of those who helped me achieve that. I hear rumours, although it's been kept under wraps, like the overlarge picture of Dan Norris and his dog, that the Two Valleys West Local Service may soon cover estates in Poulton, Radstock, Westfield and the Cam Valley to the Odd Town Park and Ride. I would congratulate Councillors Hardman and Johnson and urge them to talk to the relevant parish councils and ward councillors about what is actually happening. I just hope that WECA will be equal in the West Local largesse of the Chew Valley, which really deserves better public support than the failing West Link has provided. Recently, Sarah and I had some extremely useful talks with First Bus about improving capacity and timings of several current buses across Baines. They're coming up with some other ideas in other areas which I think will be very good news for some of our other rural villages. As over 1,300 people who signed my rural bus petition agreed, regular rural transport is vital for younger and older people alike, and for those who do not want or cannot use private cars for health, financial and environmental reasons. Let's hope that all these green shoots blossom and provide fruit, or better still, more reliable rural buses.
Thank you. Councillor Alton.
Thank you, Chair. I previously spoke at the Cabinet meeting on February the 8th to raise the issue of car parking in Midsummer Norton and to highlight the concerns residents and businesses have shared with me. In my statement, I acknowledge the budget gap that the Council is facing and the limited options to meet that gap. It is clear that parking is one of the key income streams across Baines, helping to pay for vital services on which we all rely on as Council taxpayers. I mentioned my survey of car park users, which illustrated that the majority of people using South Road car park are staying for a relatively short period, so up to 2 hours. This is why I've been calling for a compromise that would include keeping 2 hours of free parking to help reduce the risk of damaging Midsummer Norton High Street businesses. I also spoke about the issues facing shop staff and concerns about variable charges, and I'm grateful that the Cabinet showed a willingness to listen to my representations. I recognise that tonight's budget vote cannot preempt the statutory traffic regulation order process, which will include a full public consultation with residents before any changes can be implemented, and I will be encouraging residents to participate in this. Tonight's decision is about setting the Council's overall operating budget, council tax and capital investment proposals for the whole district for the forthcoming financial year. The proposed Midsummer Norton parking charges form one part of an income target for parking services within the overall revenue budget. With this in mind, I've looked at the rest of the proposals and I'm pleased to see that there is good news and investment proposed for Midsummer Norton. In particular, I'm pleased investment will continue for Midsummer Norton High Street renewal, and I look forward to work starting on the town square this year, and including the improvements of shop fronts on high streets, which shopkeepers I've spoken to welcome. The new enterprise zone, recently signed off by Cabinet, is a significant project which will be bringing new sustainable jobs to Summer Valley, along with transport links which will benefit all residents. Active travel improvements will also come through the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement Scheme, and active travel prescribing and Summer Valley Rediscovered projects are also continuing. I'm also pleased to see a long list of highway maintenance projects for different parts of Midsummer Norton, which are listed in Annex 5.2, including street lighting, drainage, resurfacing, pedestrian schemes and so-called micro-asphalt. And one other line I spotted was £46,000 for White City football ground facilities and boundaries included in Apex 5.4. So in light of the significant investment proposed for Midsummer Norton and the fact that a statutory TRO process must be carried out before any charges can be implemented, I will be supporting the budget this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Hurst.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to welcome the budget. This budget, I think, demonstrates the Lib Dems administration's ability to be creative, identify new opportunities for income generation and investment while making efficiency savings to deliver a balanced budget. Mark Elliott, the Cabinet and the officer team deserve our congratulations on clearly a challenging budget cycle. There are a few things to highlight and to particularly welcome. The £2 million investment in Scholars Way, a project we've been working on for a number of years, which will enable more safe travel options for our residents and particularly our young people, linking them into a network of educational establishments is a real commitment that we should welcome. The ongoing investment in council housing we've heard a little bit about this evening and is much needed to meet the demands of housing for our residents. In particular, I want to welcome the £5 million growth in children and adult services budgets to meet and protect our most vulnerable. It's quite an extraordinary thing that in this budget round that we've been able to put additional monies in, and our Cabinet lead should be commended for being able to find that. In particular, I want to talk also about the Clean and Green scheme. Getting the basics right, the things that residents notice sometimes get brushed under the carpet or are easy cuts. But we've managed in this budget proposal to invest in the Clean and Green scheme, and in particular issues like tackling litter, which our residents care passionately about and have pride in the areas that they live in. As Cabinet Project Lead, I particularly want to welcome the ongoing commitment in the Capital Programme to the Livable Neighbourhood Programme. These schemes are not easy, as we've experienced only this week. Developing these schemes through co-design with communities is challenging, but the focus and the goal of improving residents' streets and encouraging safe, active and more sustainable travel is definitely a goal that is worth achieving and working hard at, even though we know that it quite often polarises communities and creates challenges. So I want to commend the robust prudent financial plan that the Lib Dem team has put together tonight and urge everyone to support the budget.
Thank you. Councillor Hodges.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to raise some concerns regarding our Council's current budget allocations and spending priorities. As a Council, it's crucial that we prioritise fairness, equity and inclusivity for all constituents. I noticed, Councillor Elliott, you called our Green Amendment a stunt. I brought this up reviewing the paper parking permits, which I think is an outdated practice back in 2023 with Cabinet Member Councillor Rigby. And I'm not sure what this makes then the 800,000 cuts to third sector with just 8 days notice to respond to affecting the poorest and most vulnerable in our community. It's clear that a significant portion of our council spending is focused on the city centre. While investing in Bath is important for its economic vitality, we mustn't neglect residents in other areas of North East Somerset. The current budget seems to favour those in or near the city centre, potentially leaving many residents feeling neglected. Moreover, there are noticeable discrepancies in fund allocations through programmes like the Local Highway Improvements Programme. It raises questions about fairness when certain wards, especially those represented by cabinet members, receive substantial funding while others get little. Is this truly fair? Let me illustrate with an example. In the rural area, a school with around 100 children is set to receive a 40,000 investment for improvements. Meanwhile, in Lambridge, with 3 schools serving about 1,000 children located in an area with heavy traffic, the funding for traffic mitigation measures is only 15,000. This stark contrast raises serious concerns about prioritisation. In the face of tighter budgets and increasing pressure on taxpayers, we must reassess our priorities. Shouldn't we focus on delivering fair outcomes for all residents of Bath and North East Somerset, rather than a select few? I urge the Council to urgently reconsider its budgetary allocations, ensuring resources are distributed fairly and transparently across all wards and communities. As a Council, we should embrace inclusive growth and development that benefits every resident, regardless of where they live within our region. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Chair. On the issue of implementing car parking charges at Midsummer Norton and Radstock, I fail to see how this will make any significant inroads into fixing the council's deficit. In fact, it is likely to have quite the opposite effect if people stop visiting these towns altogether, as some of my residents have suggested they will. A loss in footfall will result in the loss of businesses, which in turn will result in the loss of business rates, which would surely have more of an impact on the council's finances than return gained from any parking fees at these small car parks. As this issue was raised and subsequently dropped last year, it is disappointing to see it return to the agenda without any further conversation to this point. Could the past year not have been used to look at the issue in detail and come up with a plan that would better suit both businesses and visitors to these towns? I am all too aware of the lack of services available to my rural residents and the need for them to travel some distance to meet basic needs for education, employment, socialising and leisure. These charges would simply add insult to injury for these residents who now have limited or no access to public transport and are paying some of the highest parking fees in both the city and Keynsham due to an economic situation that is beyond their control. To argue that this change would improve air quality is also disingenuous. Anyone who visits these areas on a regular basis will know that most of the traffic passes through, and any potential air quality issues are not primarily caused by visitor parking. Yet I see no significant increase in subsidies to support local bus services in North East Somerset to alleviate this issue. While I understand the need to find solutions to any financial black hole, and I do appreciate this is not a simple job, the last-minute inclusion of parking charges into the budget feels like a fait accompli, a panicked knee-jerk reaction to fix a budget that is suffering from years of underinvestment from an uncaring Conservative government. Over the past year, I have tried to keep an open mind in the face of clamouring cries from residents regarding the disregard of the needs of North East Somerset. Unfortunately, the constant chipping away at funding for public services and the implementation of charges that affect people's daily lives is all too clear in our rural villages and towns. Rushing in measure at the 11th hour is not the way to consider or announce these charges. A more reasoned and robust argument beyond financial desperation needs to be made for implementing car parking charges in the Summer Valley, and I would urge the Council to look at this strategically over the coming year to avoid closing businesses and disadvantaging residents in rural areas further. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Romero.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the Chair of the Children and Adults Scrutiny Panel, I wanted to reflect on the response to the statements made by the third sector organisations to that panel and to the resources panel. It was clear that the voluntary sector had been completely blindsided by the news that their organisations would collectively need to find over £800,000 in savings during the next financial year. So it was gratifying to hear that the Cabinet Member for Resources has listened to those statements made by DHI, Julian House and 3SG, and also that he will act. Firstly, Councillor Elliott has agreed to remove the immediate cliff edge threat and now plans to spread the savings over 2 years. He has also committed to working with voluntary organisations to properly assess the contribution they make to ensure that the Council's statutory obligations, especially to the most vulnerable, are met. As it is often said, prevention is better than a cure. When this applies to council services and to partner organisations, this translates into investing in early help means less money will need to be spent later on. The current ratio is a spend of £1 in prevention saves £20 being spent further down the line in more serious interventions. Part of the issue will always be that the savings from early investment by the council may not be felt by the council, but instead may mean less will be needed to be spent by partners such as health and the police. However, the council needs to take the broader view and will work with all to ensure that the most vulnerable are properly supported to prevent not just expensive interventions, but far more importantly, to prevent the very worst outcomes from happening. I know that the whole council has listened to the concerns of the voluntary sector, and I am certain that the Cabinet Member for Resources will be true to his word and that he will work with the third sector in the review process, and that if it is found that the services provided by the third sector do prevent need in statutory services, he will be brave and bold and be as creative as the voluntary sector planned to be in ensuring that these services will continue to protect and support our most vulnerable residents. Despite this administration's best efforts, we cannot offset the full scale of damage the current Conservative government is inflicting on local councils. As it has been said, the financial picture for councils across the country is dire. What we need is not new ways to not break fragile support structures, but proper social care reform. I hope Labour, assuming they do form the next government, seizes the nettle and finds a far better way of funding social care than the current model where the burden falls unsustainably on local government.
Thank you. Our final speaker, Councillor Hodge.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak about the highways maintenance and the local highway improvements, formerly TIP budgets. Colleagues, we all remember stark warnings from COP26 3 years ago now. We must halt our carbon emissions this decade and turn this tragedy to triumph. And recently, worrying reports of the world's first year-long breach of 1.5 degrees warming. Do we want to do our bit in Baines, or will we sit tight and hope someone else will take the urgent decisions? Let's not bank on it, with both the Tories and Labour rowing back on green pledges. Ours is an administration in a hurry. To meet our net zero ambitions by 2030, a 25% reduction in miles travelled by car is needed. To this end, this budget prioritises enabling travel choices. Many of our busy residents say public transport is simply not an option, and our roads are too unsafe for children and the elderly, in particular, to walk or cycle. The WECA Mayor may have a questionable strategy for our precious BSIP bus funding, but local highways infrastructure is an area where we can really make a difference. I remind colleagues that we are dealing with a legacy of underinvestment. Since 2019, DfT grants to the Council in both these areas have remained static, at wholly inadequate levels against a backdrop of increasing costs. In terms of maintaining our roads and pavements, this budget provides significantly more to address potholes, putting cyclist safety first. In addition, we are again increasing the spend on improving our pavements, bringing it to £1.1 million, 4 times more than in 2019. Building on being one of the first councils outside London to implement a clean air zone, we've moved fast to put the CAS income straight back into improvements for more clean air. Using the CAS Reserve Fund, we have increased the total TIP budget to £2.9 million, and for local schemes specifically to almost £2.3 million, 4 times more spending, bringing more pedestrian crossings, more traffic calming measures and more 20-mile-an-hour zones. We thank our hard-working highways officers. I commend to you a TIP budget which, as well as improving our existing infrastructure, such as bus stops, cycle stands and speed signs, provides 28 new ward schemes, all chosen on a potential improvement to pedestrian safety, with over half improving routes to schools specifically, 11 new pedestrian crossings, 12 new 20-mile-an-hour zones. I'm also pleased to confirm that more than half the budget will be spent on schemes in North East Somerset, supporting our rural communities. This is an administration determined to enable traffic choice and cut emissions. I commend to you an ambitious capital programme.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you, Chair.
I'll pick up some of the points that have been raised. The social care funding point, I think, listening to the debate, one would think that social care funding is being cut. I need to repeat, we've got a 9 million gross or 5.8 million net increase in social care funding in this budget. We are drastically increasing our funding of social care. We care that that budget is well funded. It is hugely increased. There are no drastic cuts to frontline services. There's been much talk about the third sector community contracts. We have agreed to work with the third sector. We have agreed that we will not cut any third sector contracts until we have done a proper review. We will not cut any services that are saving the council money further down the line. That is completely clear. It has been agreed. We have talked to the third sector providers about that. I have already apologised to them in a PDS meeting about the fact that that proposal came in late. We unfortunately are in a situation where budgets are under extreme pressure, and the proposal came in later than we would have wanted. But we have talked to them. We have agreed to spread the costs. We have agreed to deal with them directly and talk to them and negotiate with them. There is no cliff edge cut in their spending. Cabinet members getting extra spending in their wards is just wrong, and it's insulting, frankly, from the Greens. And Greens objecting to emissions-based car parking charges is very strange indeed, and I have to come back to referring to modal filters as roadblocks from the Green Party. It's just bizarre. Are you actually going to stay true to your principles, or is it just about now pandering to whatever is coming along next? I just don't understand. Midsummer Norton car parking charges is the right thing to do. We're investing £3.5 million in Midsummer Norton High Street. We are not leaving Midsummer Norton bereft. There is much work going on there, but the unfairness of having one area which has got free car parking when the rest of the authority doesn't is not sound. I'll make no apologies for prioritising action on climate change, Councillor Hale. We'll keep doing that. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? Climate emergency is, as it says, an emergency. We need to take action now. There was some talk of recycling centres. The recycling centres, yes, we are reducing the number of hours they are opened, but those are recycling centres which have a booking system. There are enough slots to meet demand. There are enough slots to meet the existing demand. Nobody is being asked to go to Keynsham instead of using those recycling centres. They're simply being asked to use the booking system. There is no excuse for any increased fly tipping. Those recycling centres you'll be able to book a slot and take your recycling to the recycling centres. Councillor David, on parks, I completely agree about the importance of parks, and I don't want to see any reduction in the park service, so I'm completely supportive of that. Buses, there was some talk of buses. I just have to keep coming back to the fact that the money we give to WECA is underspent. Please direct your comments to the WECA Mayor. We need the WECA Mayor to fulfil his responsibilities and provide us with buses in North East Somerset. That is his job. That is money we give him to do that job. He is not doing it. It needs to be done. Social housing was mentioned. We are, for the first time in a generation, we are building social housing. Social housing, not affordable housing, social housing. Council-owned properties for social rent. We have a plan to build that up to hundreds of those a year. We are absolutely committed to doing that. As I said in my main speech, it costs £325 million a year to run the council. We now spend over half of that on social care alone, roughly £160 million, 35 million more than all of our income from council tax. That obviously leaves less than half remaining for all the other things we do operationally: refuse and recycling, housing services, planning, highways, public health, recreation and tourism support, everything else. Despite that, we are proposing a balanced budget for this year and next year, which is not just a getting-by budget, something other councils across the country, frankly, would be pleased with. But this is not just a getting-by budget, but a budget that balances sound financial management with ambitious plans to deliver on our commitments to the residents of Bath and North East Somerset. In our manifesto, we set out our focus on leading on action to mitigate the climate and nature emergency, delivering new council homes, cleaner and safer streets, more local things to do, championing our local economy, heritage and culture. This budget addresses every single one of those areas. I repeat my congratulations to everyone who has been involved in the difficult task of pulling this budget together, and I commend it to the Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. We move now to the vote. Again, it's a named vote. Okay, that? Oh, not quite ready.
Okay. Michael Orton.
For the budget.
Alex Beaumont.
For.
David Biddleston.
For the budget.
Colin Blackburn.
Against.
Chris Dando.
For.
Alison Bourne. Apologies. For. Chris Dando. Jess David. For. Mark Elliott.
For.
Sarah Evans.
Against.
Fiona Gawley. For. Kevin Guy.
For.
Alan Hale.
Against.
Ian Halsall.
For.
Dave Harding.
For.
Liz Hardman. Gavin Heathcote.
I'm against.
Steve Hedges.
For.
Saskia Hadidis. Against. Ollie Henman.
For.
Joel Hurst.
For.
Lucy Hodge. For. Duncan Hounsell.
For.
Sean Hughes.
Against.
Dr. Eleanor Jackson. Grant Johnson. Samantha Kelly. For. George Leach.
For.
John Leach.
For.
Hal McPhee.
For.
Ruth Malloy. Paul May.
For.
Matt McCabe.
For.
Sarah Moore. For. Anne Morgan. For. Robin Moss.
For.
Michelle O'Doherty. For. Bharat Pankania.
For.
Amanda Rigby. Dina Ramiro. For. Paul Roper.
For.
Sam Ross.
Against.
Onkar Sani.
For.
Toby Simon.
For.
George Tomlin.
For.
Malcolm Treby.
For.
Andy Waite.
For.
Karen Walker.
Against.
Sarah Warren. For. Tim Warren.
Against.
Joanna Wright.
Against.
Okay, so that's 39 for, 10 against, so that's carried.
Thank you. That's carried, so the budget passes. Okay. We move on to item 9, Treasury Management Strategy Statement. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this brief after the excitement of the budget. This report sets out the framework for managing the Council's cash balances, borrowings and investments, and the approach to managing the associated risks with that. As I set out in my introduction to the budget, our Treasury Management team do a fantastic job. Given economic uncertainty, the Council takes a very prudent approach to its investments. Section 4 of Appendix 1 sets out the Treasury Management indicators which express that prudent approach, setting out our borrowing limits, credit risk, liquidity, interest rate risk, refinancing risk and long-term investment risk. As I said earlier, our borrowing sits at the same level now it was at nearly 5 years ago at 216 million. Our total cash investments are just over 39 million, leaving a net debt position of just over 178 million. I'd like to commend the excellent work of the Council's corporate finance team, and we benchmark very well in terms of Treasury performance. I'm entirely confident in the skill and expertise we have in Treasury management and that the team displays. I move the recommendations in paragraphs 2.1 and 2.2 of the report.
Thank you. Councillor McCabe?
Yeah, I'm happy to second this. I think we've pointed out just how extraordinary it is to be in the same borrowing position that we were back in 2019. It's incredibly important. Well done to the officers, and thank you to Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. I've not seen anybody indicate they wish to speak on this item, so we'll move straight to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Item 10, statements from councillors. Councillor Pancarnier? You haven't got a statement? Okay, in which case, that finishes the meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to a close. Thank you.